어, 제가 유니티라는 걸 이제 시작하게 돼서 공부하는 거를 좀 한번 올려보겠습니다. 유니티 페이지, 유니티에 이제 유니티런이라는 사이트가 잘 되어 있어서 여기서 몇 가지 좀 프로젝트 수업 과정 수업을 좀 들어보면서 한번 익숙해져 보도록 하겠습니다. 한번 그러면 처음은 이제 프로젝트 만들기라고 해서
To watch me before you
이거는 아까 들어서 넘어가고 이제 에셋 임포트 및 프로토타입 1 열기 어떻게 하냐 그거부터 한번 해보겠습니다. 따라하면 될 것 같지?
Now that we've created our first Unity project, let's start getting our scene set up by importing the project. Do
처음부터
this
할까요?
yourself. Now, up first, just for some organization, I'm going to create a new folder on my desktop where I'm going to be saving my Create with Code project. So if I right click on the desktop, I'm going to select New and create a new folder. Then I'm going to rename this folder Create with Code Carl D. That way I know that this is where all my projects are going to go. So if I press Enter, now I have a folder on my desktop where I'm going to be saving all of my Create with Code projects. The next thing I'm going to do is create a new empty project called Prototype 1 on the correct version of Unity through Unity Hub. However, since Unity Hub is changing all the time, we want to make sure you have the most up-to-date instructions. So I'm not going to demonstrate that in the video. Instead, I want you to very carefully follow. Since Unity Hub is changing all the time, we want to make sure you have the most up-to-date instructions. So I'm not going to demonstrate that in the video. Instead, I want you to very carefully follow the instructions below to create your project. So just make sure when this video is over, you follow the instructions below the video to make your project. I'm just going to skip forward when the project is already made. And here you can see my
프로토타입 1 오케이. 프로토타입 1 띄어쓰기 좀 안 좋으니까 클라우디오 하지 않고
new Unity project for Prototype 1. And you can see here the Unity interface. Now, if this is your first time seeing it, it may be a little intimidating with all of the different windows and buttons, but don't worry, we'll go through it in detail very soon. So for now, this is where I'll stop and let you create your own Unity project. Make sure to follow the steps below to create a folder to save all of your Unity projects, and then create your very first Unity project through Unity Hub.
처음 거는 끝났고 이제 다음 거.
Library. Now remember, watch me before you do this yourself. In order to download our project files to get started, we'll need to use the download link in the instructions below this video. If I click on that link, it will download a zip of the starter files right onto my computer. So let's see where I saved those files. On my desktop, where I created that new Create with Code folder for my projects, you can see here I've already downloaded the project library.
이거를 다운받은 걸 압축을 풀고
library for prototype 1. So all I need to do is extract this folder to get the assets I'm going to use for my project. So I'm just going to right click on prototype 1, extract all, and then it's going to select a location, which in this case is the folder that I'm already working in. So I'm going to extract, and you can see that it extracted pretty quickly. And if I go into this new prototype 1 direct download folder, you can see here that I have the prototype 1 starter files, and it's of type Unity package file. So this is what I'm going to use to import into my project to get set up. If I head into Unity, I'm going to go to the Assets button on my menu, go to Import
하고 천천히 해야겠다. 이렇게 뜨고
Package, and then Custom Package of type Unity package file. So this is what I'm going to use to import into my project to get set up. If I head into Unity, I'm going to go to the
메뉴의 에셋
Assets button on my menu, go to
임포트 패키지 커스텀 패키지 네 압축을 해대한 폴더로 이동해서 이걸 넣는다. 그다음에
Import Package, and then Custom Package. Now I need to find that Unity package file that I just extracted. So I'm going to go to that Create with Code folder on my desktop, go down into the Prototype 1 direct download folder, and find the Prototype 1 starter files, select it, and open it. You can see that Unity prompts you with a new window asking you if you want to import all of these different files. And we're going to need all of these for our project, so I'm going to import at the bottom of the window. Now let me show you what Unity just did. So if I get started in Unity, down in the project window down here, you can see that there's an assets folder that has a course library folder and a scenes folder. So the course library folder is what was just added into our project. And if I click into this folder, you can see that there are some additional folders for some of the props and objects that are going to be in our scene when we get started. So for example, I could go to the obstacles folder, and you can see here a list of different obstacles. And you can actually use this little slider at the bottom of the project window if you want to actually see what the models of those objects look like. So now you can see we have all these different props that we can use in our scene, like a rock or a barrier or a traffic cone. Now I'm going to show you what this actually looks like inside of Unity. So if I go back to my assets folder by selecting it on the left-hand side of the project window, I'm going to go into the scenes folder, and inside of my scenes folder, I have a sample scene, which is actually what's currently open right now, which has nothing inside of it. Or I can open up this prototype 1 scene by double-clicking on it. And now inside of this prototype 1 scene, you can see that it pops up inside of this scene window here in the center of Unity. And if I just use my mouse while it's hovering over this scene window, right click and hold, I can actually move the camera that's in the scene view to see around this virtual world that we've created for you. So you can see here we have this long road. We have some of those mountains in the background. We have a pretty cool sky with stars in it. And so this will be the scene that we'll start building our first Unity project in. Now, since this will be our main scene, we actually don't need this sample scene anymore. So I'm just going to right click on sample scene and then delete it.
제거. delete.
And delete the selected asset. So now the only thing that's in my Unity project is that prototype 1 scene. So what you're going to do is download the starter files for the project by using the link in the instructions below this video, and then you're going to extract
어떻게 하라고?
one scene. So what you're going to do is download the starter files for the project by using the link in the instructions below this video, and then you're going to extract that zipped folder that we gave you, and you can double check to make sure that inside of that folder are the Prototype 1 starter files. Once you've unzipped those starter files, you're going to head back into Unity, go to the Assets button in the top menu, go to Import Package, and import a custom
아까
package.
했던 걸 다시
From there, you're going to
알려주는구나.
find the folder where you extracted those starter files. So in my case, on my Create with Code Carl D folder on my desktop. And you're going to find the Prototype 1 starter files Unity package file. So you're going to select it and then open it. You'll then be prompted with an import window. So in my case, since I already imported these assets, I don't have to worry about it, but you'll see a long list of different files. And at the bottom right of the window, you're going to click import. And that might take a few minutes. Once you've done that, you can head over to the project window down in the bottom of Unity, select the assets folder, and go into your scenes folder. You're going to double click on Prototype 1 to open it inside of your project. And then you can just right click and delete the sample scene because we won't be using it. And then if you want to explore the virtual world that we've created, you can just hover your mouse over the scene view here, right click and hold the right mouse button, and then you can move your mouse to move your camera in this virtual world.
별이 좀 커 보이네.
So now it's your turn.
오케이. 다음 단계. 이번엔 차량 추가.
So now that we've added in the starter assets for our project, we're gonna go and add a vehicle into our scene. Make sure to watch me do this before you try it yourself. And just as a heads up, from here on out in these videos, I'll be using an older version of Unity. As you can see, the icons look slightly different, but otherwise everything is gonna work pretty much the same. What I'm gonna do is in the main section of our project window, I'm going to double click on vehicles.
vehicle 잠깐만. custom library. vehicle.
And that'll open up that folder, and that'll show us all of the different vehicles that we can use in our scene. I like the red truck over here. I think it looks really cool. So I'm going to left click on that vehicle, drag it into our hierarchy on the left side of Unity. When I let go, you can see that our vehicle has now been added into this large area in the center called our scene view. So all of our assets in our assets folder are what we use to populate our scene with different objects like our trucks. If we wanted to add some cool environmental props, maybe some boxes or trees, mountains, whatever we want to add, that's all stored in our assets folders, and then we can drag and drop them into our hierarchy to add them to our scene.
오케이. 이렇게
Now the hierarchy actually keeps track of all of the different objects that are currently there. So we have our camera, we have a light, we have some environment, and then we have our vehicle that we just added. Now, to really see our vehicle and experience the scene view that allows us to visualize everything that's happening in our game, what you can do is hover over the scene view with your mouse. If you hold the right mouse button, right click, and then you can actually move using the W, A, S, and D keys on your keyboard. So if I press W, I can zoom in. If I press S, I actually fly backwards. If I press A, I fly to the left. If I press D, I fly to the right.
돌아다닐 수
So you
있다.
can use all of these in
편하다.
tandem, and you can actually move your mouse while you're flying around. So you can see all around your scene.
오케이.
Now, I have a problem here. I've gotten myself lost. I actually don't know where I am. I can see these nice mountains, though. So, in your hierarchy, if you make sure that your vehicle, your truck is selected, you can see it's highlighted in blue, so you know it's selected. If you want to make sure, on the right side of Unity, you can see in your inspector, this actually shows you what the current object is selected, which is our truck. With my mouse now hovering over our scene view, if I press the F key on our keyboard, this will actually focus or frame back in our object that we have selected in our hierarchy. So that's
이렇게
super
처음으로
helpful.
돌아온다.
Another thing that we
F
can
누르면
do
오케이.
if we just want to get a 360-degree view, if we want to see all around this truck, we can actually hold down the Alt key on our keyboard. And then with our left click, if we drag to the left or to the right, we can actually rotate around. And what this is actually doing is it's rotating around the center point of our
Alt 키
screen,
누르면
which in this
이렇게
case
돌려볼 수
is our
있다.
vehicle because we used our F key to focus on it.
오케이.
So now we can see all around our truck. And then another helpful thing that we can do is if we press the Alt key down and hold it again, we can actually use our right mouse button. And if we click and drag that, if we go to the left, we actually zoom out. And if we go to the right, we can actually zoom in. So using all of these different keys, we can navigate around our scene, focus on different objects, and take a look at them
뭐야
in
이거
depth.
어떻게 하는 거야?
And if we go to the we use our right mouse button. And if we click and drag that, if we go to the left, we actually zoom out. And if we go to the right, we can actually zoom in. So using all of these different keys, we can navigate around our scene, focus on different objects, and take a look at them in depth. A really helpful keyboard shortcut to know is the undo action.
오,
So, for
취소하는
example,
거.
with my vehicle selected, if I accidentally moved that vehicle when I was just trying to navigate around the scene, I can press Ctrl Z or Command Z, and that will undo my most recent action. This is super helpful to know just in case you ever accidentally move something, or say you adjust something and you don't like the way that it's positioned in your world, you can just undo that to set it back. One thing to note is undo will only undo our most recent action. So, in order to get this vehicle back to where it started, since I actually changed this object 3 different times, I have to use Ctrl Z or Command Z 1, 2, 3 times, and it will set it backwards. So, it's very helpful to remember the undo shortcut on your keyboard. So that way, in case you ever accidentally move something or you just don't like the way that something's positioned, you can just reset it back to what it was before. So what you're going to do is you're going to grab one of your vehicles out of the course library, whichever one you want, left click and drag it into the hierarchy. And then when your vehicle is added to the scene, get used to playing around with all of the different ways that you can navigate your scene view. With your mouse cursor hovering over the scene view, if you hold right-click down, you can move your camera around as you move your cursor.
오케이.
If you use the different keys like W, A, S, and D, learn how to move around in the world. Make sure you get some practice in also focusing on your object in case you either get lost or you want a better view. So go into your hierarchy on the left, select your vehicle. With your cursor over the scene view, press the F key on your keyboard so that you can frame or focus in on that object. Play around with rotating around the object, so you can press the Alt key, hold it down, and then press and hold your left click on your mouse, and you can rotate it around your vehicle while it's centered in your scene. And then you can even get some practice in pressing and holding the Alt key, clicking and holding your right mouse button, and then dragging it to the left.
3번은 장애물을 만드는 거.
We've added a vehicle to our scene. Now the next thing that we need to add is an
얼마나 더 해야 돼? 되게 간단해 보이지만 할 게 많구만.
obstacle. So we're going to choose one and place it in front of the player. Make sure to watch me before you do this yourself. Now, down in our project window, where we got our vehicles, we're going to make sure that we go to the sidebar, select our course library so that we can see all of the other folders inside of our course library. And then we're going to go to the obstacles folder and double click. And you can see here we have all of these different options that we can select from. I'm going to choose this crate because our truck actually has some boxes on it, so it looks kind of similar. So this time I'm going to left click and drag our crate, but instead of going into the hierarchy, I'm going to drag it directly into our scene view, and you can see that it's actually updating live wherever my mouse is positioned. And in fact, if I drag it closer to the road, it actually snaps directly onto the road. I can even do it with the car. Look, there's a box on the car. So I'm going to release my mouse button now, and you can see our box has been positioned in our scene. Now, in Unity, we actually have coordinates to keep track of where our objects are in the world. So, for example, our truck is actually in the center, the exact center of this virtual world we've created. At 0, 0, 0, you can see that by going and clicking on the truck, make sure it's selected.
on the right side of Unity, you can see the inspector window pop up, and it expands. Underneath the inspector, at the very top of all of the different options, there's our transform. These are called components. So our transform component specifically carries the data around our position, our rotation, and our scale. The rotation and scale we'll get to in a little bit. With our position, you can see that it's set to 0, 0, 0. If I compare that to our crate, by selecting our crate, you can see that the crate information is now in our inspector. Our crate is positioned at 4.8, negative 0.0 on the Y, and then 4.26 on the Z. Handily, you can actually tell all of these different letters from these arrows over here on our box. So currently we have our move tool selected. You can actually see which tools we currently have selected in the top left. We'll go through some of the other ones in a bit. With our move tool, you can see the up arrow. So in fact, if I left click and drag on this green arrow, you can see over on the right side in our inspector, the Y position changes. If I want to undo what I just did, I can use Control or Command Z. You can do the same thing with the X, which in this case is this red arrow. And I'll undo that with Control or Command Z. And with the blue arrow, this is RZ. So I'll undo that. So I'm going to reposition this crate, and I can do this one of two ways. I can either do it by going to the inspector on the right underneath our transform. If I actually select the box, you can see that all of the text is now highlighted. I can actually type in 0. And if I type in 0, you can see that now our box is moved all the way in front of our vehicle. Now, if I were to set all of these to 0, that would take a really long time, and I don't want to do that. So in our transform, you can actually see all the way on the right side of our component, there's this little gear icon. If you're using a new version of Unity, it will actually be 3 little dots instead of a gear. So if I left click on the gear icon, you can see that there are different options, and one of the options is reset position. So if I left click that, now our positions are set to 0, 0, 0. And so now what I can do is if I want to move our box now that everything's at 0, now I'm going to do this the easy way, where I can just type in the values in our inspector. So I want this to be a good distance away, and it would be a lot of work to just drag it with our move tool. So instead, I'm just going to go into the inspector on the right side. In our transform position, I'm going to select the Z text. If I click on it, you can see that now it highlights that text, and I can just type in 25. And it automatically moves my box 25 units away on the Z. And a handy thing to know in Unity is that each individual unit, so if I had a Z of 1, that would actually just be 1 meter. So we actually moved this box 25 meters on the Z position, which moved it in front of our vehicle. Last but not least, I'm going to do some cleanup on my different objects. So my crate, I'm going to rename. So my crate, what I'm going to do is in the hierarchy on the left side, if I right-click on the crate, I can rename. There's a rename option. I left-click that. Now I can type in anything I want. So I'll call this an obstacle for now. And then with our truck or vehicle, if you select the vehicle in the hierarchy, you can actually rename this through the inspector on the right side.
제목을 바꿀
If you
수
see at the top, you
있다.
have the same name that's in the hierarchy on the left. So if I actually click on that text, it highlights all of it. If I type in vehicle and I press enter, now you see in our hierarchy, our truck has been renamed vehicle. So different ways that you can
그래서
rename your
위치도
objects.
바꿀 수 있다.
So what you're going to do is in your project window, select the course library, double click on the obstacles folder, left click and drag one of your obstacles into the scene. And then when your obstacle is in the scene, if you select it
이거는 뭐
in
내가
your
예전에
hierarchy by
해봤기
clicking on it, on the right
때문에
side, you can see all of the information in the
어렵지
inspector
않구나.
about
여기
the
있는 게
obstacle's components.
컴포넌트다. 개념. 여기
Rename
컴포넌트
your
하나,
obstacle to
둘,
obstacle,
셋, 뭐 넷,
and then you're
이렇게
going to
순서대로
go to the transform component.
이렇게
underneath
세울
that
수도
section,
있다. 끌어서
You're
이렇게
going
할
to go
수도
all the way to the
있다.
right. There's this little gear icon. Left click, reset position. So it's back at 0, 0, 0, right where our vehicle is.
그다음에
And then once you've done that, you can go and select the
000으로
position Z, click on it,
이렇게
and then you can
돌아온다.
type in whatever number that you want, and it'll move that obstacle in the Z direction. And then what you're going to do is you're then going to select
25로
your
다시
vehicle, and you're going
옮기고
to rename the
다시
vehicle that you have selected to just be called vehicle.
스케일을
Now it's
키울
your turn.
수 있다. 이러면은 가로 세로 높이가 2배가 된다. 이것도 나중에 할 것 같긴 한데 또 순서가 되면 또 해보고. 그다음에 카메라 배치. 카메라를 눌러서 F키를 설정해라.
Now we've added our player, our vehicle, and our obstacle to our scene, but now we really want to get a lens of our player and understand their
어려운데?
perspective. So we can actually do that using our camera. If you go to the hierarchy on the left side of Unity, select your main camera by clicking on it, you can see that now we have the camera
화면
selected.
선택했고,
This very large rectangle pops up, and on the bottom right, we can actually see our camera preview. In fact, if I deselect the camera, the preview goes away, and if I select the camera again, the preview comes back. So the preview is actually what we can
없는데?
see of what the player will see in
아,
our
여기
game.
있구나.
And in fact, that preview is entirely mapped to this huge rectangle that we can see in our scene. And so this is very helpful to see and understand what the player sees. Our camera actually controls what we see in our game view. So, in fact, if I go to the top of Unity and I press the play button, you can see that our scene view changes to this view here, which is our game view. In fact, in the center, the two tabs are side by side right next to each other. So, in our game view, you can see that if I try and click on our vehicle here, nothing will happen. I can still select the vehicle in the hierarchy, however, nothing changes here. Versus if I go to my scene, you can see that our vehicle's back there. If I select the move tool, I can move our vehicle again. And then in the game view, you can see that our vehicle actually moved a little bit. So maybe if I go in the transform component, if I press like 5, okay, cool. So the vehicle is moving. That's interesting. Now, the one thing about play mode is, so this is how we test how our different objects interact in our world, how our player can, for example, control our vehicle. Since I made changes to our vehicle in our scene view, in fact, if I press the play button again, so I stop the play mode, our vehicle actually
여기서
moves back.
옮길 순 있고,
Let's see if I can test that again.
그렇지만
We'll go straight into the scene view this time by clicking on
다시
it, and
영으로
I'll just move the vehicle
돌아왔다.
back somewhere to like maybe like 10ish or so.
게임
Then I press
뷰에서는
play again.
그
Our vehicle
거기서만
snaps backwards.
되고
So play mode
플레이
doesn't actually
벤트에서만
save if we
보고
change anything about any of
다시
our
이제
objects.
저장하진
But
않는다.
our play mode and our game view is really helpful. So when we're testing out how our player actually plays and experiences the game, we can see that in the game view versus in our scene view, where we go to set up our objects, position our vehicles, move our
씬
obstacles in
뷰랑
our
게임
scene,
뷰가 두
and
개가
interact with
있다.
them that way to create a
Okay.
layout for our environment. So what you're going to do is you're going to go into your hierarchy, select your camera, you can see the camera, and then if you want to go into your play mode, you can press the play button,
근데
and it'll
나는
go into
카메라
your
모드가
game
좀
view.
다른 것
In fact, you
같다.
can use Control or Command P to actually exit play mode, and if you press that again, Control or Command and the P key, it'll go back in, and so you can see what your player will see when they're actually in the game. Now it's your turn.
이렇게 하는 거 있는 건가? 크게. 오케이. 차량 뒤로 카메라 이동.
Watch me before you do this yourself. So, we've learned a little bit about the perspective of our player and what they can see and experience. We've added our vehicle and we've added our obstacle now. So, we're actually going to reposition our camera in our scene. So that way we can actually get a better view behind our vehicle. So, what we're actually going to do is instead of using our transform component on the right side, we're going to make sure we select our camera. And in the top left, you can see all of the different tools that we have. So for now, we're going to make sure that we have our move tool selected. It's those 4 arrows in those 4 different directions. So remember, control and hold and then left click on the red arrow. And so we can move our camera on the x-axis here. And I want to get it to 0. Cool. And now I'm going to keep my mouse cursor in our scene view, and I'm going to press F to focus so I can shift the perspective again back onto our camera. Now I'm going to do the same thing with this blue, the x-axis here, and I want to get it to 0.
설명 듣는 거니까
Cool. And now
놓치더라도
I'm
좀
going to
넘어가
keep
보자.
my mouse cursor in our scene view, and I'm going to press F to focus so I can shift the perspective again back onto our camera. Now I'm going to do the same thing with this blue arrow so I can move our camera behind our vehicle. So if I left click and press and hold our control key, I can move our camera back somewhere to around, say, there. And then the same thing with our Y. I will press the control key and hold and left click and drag. So we'll put it somewhere about there. Cool. So now our camera, if I focus back in by pressing the F, and then I'll reposition my camera of our scene view. Now you can see that our camera, according to our preview, is just looking straight off the road. So that's not a helpful perspective at all. So we're going to reposition this camera this time with our rotate tool. So if you go to the top left of Unity, you can see this circle arrows. If I click on that, our rotate tool is selected.
로테이트.
And now, in fact, you can see all of the different arrows have turned into lines, but these lines are actually well aligned to all of the different axes that we were playing around with before, so the X, the Y, and the Z. Now, to make it a little bit easier for us, I'm actually going to go
카메라 F.
to the top right of our scene view, and you can see this handy little gizmo over here with all the different arrows. And in fact, if I click on this green Y arrow here, you can see our perspective actually shifts to a top-down view from what we would see on the Y. And so I'm going to reposition back over the camera. So now I can very clearly see this green line, which will actually rotate around our Y-axis in this case. So if I click on the green line, I can rotate our camera by dragging it to the right or to the left. So I want to drag it, we'll say it's about there. And maybe I'll clean this up a bit later. So that's a good behind view. And now, in fact, I want to get a better perspective on our car. You can see it's not entirely in frame. So if I click on this opposite arrow of our Z arrow, this will actually, instead of bringing us to the front of our camera, this will put us behind our camera. And so now you can see we have a better view of our Z axis here. Actually, in fact, I want to go to the X, so I'm going to go to the side view, click that. There you go, better. So now you can see, we can see the Z axis. So this will actually rotate our camera up and down. If I click and hold on this, I can drag it down a little bit, and now we have a really good view of our vehicle. In terms of other tools that you can use to make it easier, so on the top left with all of our different tools, we have all the way on the left-hand side our hand tool. So in fact, if we select our hand tool and we left-click and drag around our scene view, you can see actually this is very similar to just moving our scene view camera or scene view perspective. The tool next to it that we were playing around with, that's our move tool. So we can move our camera or any of our objects in these 3 different directions. Let's see if I can get that X back. There you go. Cool. Now you can see all the different arrows. The tool next to that is our rotate tool, which we use to rotate our camera down towards the player. The tool next to that is actually our scale tool, which in this case wouldn't really do anything because we're on a camera. But if we were to select our obstacle or our vehicle, we could make our vehicle larger if we wanted to. The tool next to that is our rect tool. So this actually combines the move, rotate, and scale tool all in one tool. However, this is only very useful for 2D. In fact, if I select the vehicle, you can get a better view. There's this kind of rectangular outline around our vehicle. So useful for 2D. In this case, we have a 3D world, so that doesn't really help. If we select the last tool, all the way on the right side, this actually combines our move, rotate, and scale tool, and you can actually see all of them around our vehicle. So you can see the rotate tool around it. You can see the movement arrows. If you click on this gray box, you can scale your vehicle up and down. I don't want to do that though, so I'm just going to Control or Command Z to undo that all the way, so it's back to normal. So I'm just going to Control or Command Z to undo them around our vehicle. So you can see the rotate tool around it. You can see the movement arrows. If you click on this gray box, you can scale your vehicle up and down. I don't want to do that though, so I'm just going to Control or Command Z to undo that all the way, so it's back to normal size. So you can actually use this tool to control all the different aspects. Useful little tip to actually scroll through all of those. So if you actually just press the Q key on your keyboard, it'll select the hand tool. If you press the W key on your keyboard without doing anything, it'll select the move tool. If you select the E key, that's our rotate. If we use the R key, that's our scale. If we press the T key, that's our rect tool. And then if we press the Y key, that's all of our tools together for our 3D space. And then one last thing that we can do just to see and make sure that our main camera is set up properly, even though we can see it in our camera preview, is if we go into our game view again by pressing the play button at the top, you can see now our perspective has shifted from side view to behind our vehicle. So that's very helpful. So what you're going to do is you're going to select your main camera, and you're going to move the camera behind our vehicle, and then you're going to use the rotate tool to rotate the vehicle into the frame of our camera. Now it's your turn.
오케이. 이번에는 인터페이스 레이아웃 커스터마이즈.
So we've set up our camera, so now that we have a good perspective of what our player will see, we're going to play around with the actual Unity editor itself to rearrange some of our windows and make it easier for us to navigate. So a really cool thing about Unity is you can actually reorganize all of these different little tabs that you see to clean up our project and make it a little bit more efficient for us. So in fact, for example, with our game view, if I left click on it and I drag it, it actually snaps out of the view that we're in. And I can put this wherever I really want. So I can put this underneath the scene, and then we can actually resize these windows. Or if I left click and drag the game again, I can drag it down to the bottom where our project window was and put it down there. So that's kind of cool. We can rearrange things however we want. Luckily, in Unity, we can actually just do all of these things with some preset options. So on the top right, all the way past the inspector, in the corner, you can see this little button that says default. So in fact, if I left click on that, and since I move things around, if I click on the default button again, it'll reset my entire editor experience to be back to what we had in the very beginning. And then if I click on the default option again, there's other options. So there's a 2x3, which is kind of cool. There's a 4 split. So this is kind of useful, especially if you're doing like a 2D game or something like that. There's a tall layout. And so this one puts our scene view and our game view side by side, which is kind of useful. We have a much larger view of what is happening. So I actually kind of like the tall view. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rearrange some things a little bit. So I'm going to make our inspector just a bit smaller. So you see these lines between the windows. You can actually mouse over them. It turns into this little drag icon. And then you can click and drag our inspector. So I'll make that a bit smaller. I'm actually going to make our hierarchy and our project column a little bit smaller too. So I'll click and drag. Now our project window is kind of messy now. So what I could do is all the way at the bottom right of our project window, there's this little slider at the bottom. So this actually makes our icons larger if I drag it to the right. If I drag it all the way to the left, it actually makes it smaller. So then I can like double click on these instead, and then it'll just create list views of what I can see. But I don't get those cool little previews of our little assets, unfortunately. And then it's still kind of narrow. If I had longer names, it'd be really hard to see. So in fact, I'm just going to turn this into one column entirely instead of having these two small columns. So in my project window, all the way on the right side, there's this tiny drop down.
And if you're using a new version of Unity, you'll see 3 dots in a vertical line.
So if I click on that, you can see there's a 2-column layout or there's a 1-column layout. So if I click on the 1 column, now it gets rid of my folder previews for what I can see inside my vehicles folder. So now instead, I just have to click on these little drop-down arrows, and then it shows me all the different assets that I can use. Same with the obstacles. The nice thing too is it makes it a little bit easier if I collapse the vehicles folder, and then I can even collapse my course library. Now it like looks really clean, which is helpful. And then the last thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to left-click and drag the game window, and I'm actually going to drag it to the bottom of our view, and it pops like that. Now one thing that might happen is, for example, if you actually drag it out of a space where there's anywhere it could snap to, it'll actually pop out like this, which can be helpful sometimes, but not entirely ideal. So you can actually just click on that tab again, drag it back, and then snap it in place. And now if we make this a bit larger, cool. Now we have a really good view of our game and our scene at the same time. So this is what we as the creator see versus what our player will see when they play the game. And then if we want to actually save this all the way on the right side back to where we set our layouts, if you click on that, at the bottom of the options is actually save layout. So if I click on save layout, I can rename. So I'll call this my layout. So now I have my layout saved to use whenever I want. So that's super handy. So what you're going to do is you're going to click on my layout, and you can select one of the different layouts that you think is cool. In this case, I went with the tall layout, and then I dragged out by clicking on the game tab and then dragging it down to the bottom, snapped it to the bottom of our scene view. So now we have both views together. I resized my inspector and my hierarchy just so there's more space. And then because our project window got a bit cluttered because it's pretty small down here, on the project window, all the way on the right side, you see this little drop down. If I click on that, there's an option to select 1 column layout. And so now all of our folders are just in these columns, and I can just expand them and collapse them to see what's inside. Now it's your turn.
오케이. 이제 한 과가 끝났고 수업 요약.
Alright, so we've made it to the end of this lesson. As a recap, we've learned a lot of new functionality. So we got our first project set up and imported so that we can use all of the different assets available to us, like our obstacles or our vehicles. We learned how to position our objects. So in this case, we have our vehicle at the origin of our world, and then we moved our box just a little bit down the road here. And we also learned how to position our camera and even used our rotation tool so that we have a better position and view of how our game will look to our player. We learned some new concepts and skills, like creating a new project, importing all of our assets, adding objects to our scene. We learned about the difference between our scene view for setting up our environment for our player and creating our stage versus our game view, which is what our players experience when they're in the game. We learned about all of the different windows, like our hierarchy or our project directory, our inspector, even moved them around and made our own custom layout. We learned how we can navigate around 3D space and all of the different tools that we can use to be able to interact with all of our different objects. In the next lesson, we'll make this project really interactive by writing our very first line of code in C# to make the vehicle move down this road and interact with our obstacle in the scene. We'll see you in the next lesson.
오케이. 한 과 끝냈고 다음 과로 가보자.